Hi, everyone. Welcome to Undergraduate Research Week. My name is Sarah Wang. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a political science major, and I'll be presenting my research conducted in the political science department with Professor Suzanne Lohman, who is also in the department, as my advisor. And my research is titled Majoritarian Interests and Non-Majoritarian Institutions, a case study of the Supreme Court and public opinion on abortion. To provide a brief background, Supreme Court justices enjoy lifetime appointments, which should read as a constitutional directive to not worry too much about public opinion. The court is, after all, a relatively insulated institution. However, justices have inherently different responsibilities than that of the legislature or the executive, meaning that they're not necessarily there to reflect the will of the people. However, the court also has no formal enforcement mechanism for its decisions, meaning that there are potential consequences of being too out of step. And this could be the threat of court packing, jurisdiction changes, disruptions to justices' private lives, all sorts of things that people have seen likely in recent media. And this means that at least on occasion, justices may need to infuse case decisions with the calculus of popular politics. And to that end, they might vote counter to their own ideology to align with public opinion. This leads me to my research question. Do non-majoritarian institutions established in a broadly majoritarian political system respond to public opinion? In terms of literature, scholars agree that the Supreme Court was designed to be counter-majoritarian, but they disagree on whether public opinion and Supreme Court decisions align, and if they do align, whether that's on non-salient or salient cases, which means that there's a gap. Is the Supreme Court majoritarian or is it not? Is responsiveness most pronounced on salient cases or non-salient cases? And there's also a lack of focus. I mean, what is a salient case? How many types of salient cases are out there? Let's take a closer look at one issue: abortion, specifically public opinion, Supreme Court decisions on abortion from Roe v. Wade 1973 to Dobbs v. Jackson 2022. My methodology, I look at approximately 50 cases on abortion since Roe 1973, and I source that from the OES Multimedia Archive. However, I recognize that not all cases might be as salient. It actually might be ineffective to use all 50. For example, a pollster might walk around and ask people how many cases they can recall. The number of cases that people can recall is likely to be much smaller, very unlikely to be all 50. So how do we narrow the scope of our case selection? Well, I looked at the New York Times front page. Past scholars have used the front page as a way of determining case salience. If it shows up on the front page, it means that a case is salient. And I also look at lists from think tanks like Pew to see what cases are considered key cases. And that methodology leads me to 8 cases that I study. Specifically, though, I use Roe as a starting point, so I technically exclude it. But we look at Roe all the way to Dobbs v. Jackson, and these cases were chosen on the basis that they address a broad range of issues in order to effectively capture different parts of the abortion question. So that's everything from government funding of abortion to the consent process for minors to partial birth abortions, whether or not states can regulate abortion. Continue with my methodology. I do differentiate between mass and elite opinion for public opinion. I look at Gallup's long-term abortion question. So they ask ever since 1975 about legality of abortion under various circumstances. So they ask, do you think that abortion should be legal under all circumstances, some circumstances, or not at all? And in terms of demographics, I look for mass opinion at age, gender, and party identification. And for elite opinion, I look at education level. So specifically, I look at this because I'm wondering whether or not there's a difference in responsiveness to mass versus elite opinion. For instance, the Supreme Court might be more inclined to respond to elite opinion, which would be people with a higher education who are more likely to turn out to vote, more likely to protest in the streets, as you can see in images on the right. Is the Supreme Court more inclined to listen to those people who are likely to raise hell than people who are just sitting at home, for example, and not paying attention? And as for the Supreme Court decisions, I use the Supreme Court database from Washington University Law to look at the ideological direction of cases. And that's a binary measurement, liberal or conservative, just seeing whether or not that's aligned with public opinion at the time. And I also look at the specific ideological score of individual justices. And I use the Martin Quinn dynamic score, which basically gauges the ideology of a justice based on their voting record. So you can see exactly how liberal or conservative an individual justice is over time. That also helps me analyze whether justices voted counter to their own ideology at some point. obviously, when I look at polls like Gallup and Pew, that is quantitative work, but qualitatively, I'm reading case opinions, I'm checking out interviews, I'm trying to gauge what justices are saying or thinking around the time that they vote on a specific case. This leads me to three hypotheses. Firstly, that the ideological direction of Supreme Court decisions on abortion is directly correlated with public support for abortion. So as public support for abortion increases, Supreme Court decisions become more liberal. And as public support for abortion decreases, Supreme Court decisions become more conservative. My second hypothesis is that justices will vote counter to their own ideology to align themselves with public opinion on abortion. And thirdly, that Supreme Court decisions on abortion are more likely to track in the direction of the politically active than the politically inactive. So my findings on public opinion, I find that public opinion, you could see clear spikes in support for abortion when Roe was being threatened. And as for demographic differences in support, I find that party identification has been an increasingly defining factor in support for abortion. And that became even more apparent beginning in the 1990s. And currently that partisan divide is wider than ever. As you can see in a chart on the right from Pew Research Center, there is an over 40 percentage point difference between Democrats and Republicans in support for abortion. So overall party identification is the strongest determinant in recent years. And in terms of demographics that define support for abortion, it's political party, and then education, age, and gender. For education, people who are highly educated, meaning they have at least a bachelor's degree, are more likely to support it than someone who has an elementary school education. In terms of age, younger people, like those 18 to 26, are more supportive of abortion than those who are 50 and above. And as for gender, women tend to be more supportive than men. The Supreme Court is largely unresponsive to public opinion. Alignment between court decisions and public opinion occurred in only 3 out of 7 cases, which was 42% of the time, undermining my first hypothesis on ideological direction. However, there was support for my second hypothesis on counter-attitudinal votes, as they were still relatively frequent. This happened in 5 out of 7 cases, which was 71% of the time, with justices citing factors like the preservation of institutional legitimacy. And my third hypothesis, the elite behavior hypothesis, was also undermined. Elites were more supportive of abortion than the mass public, meaning that by virtue of the court not being aligned with mass public opinion, it was even more out of touch with elite opinion. In conclusion, this study is significant in that it focuses the debate of judicial responsiveness on just one salient issue to really test existing theories. So in the past, scholars have largely analyzed judicial responsiveness on an aggregate level. So when they studied salience, they would look at public mood using a measure called Stimson's public mood. And what that meant, though, is that they would consider a variety of issues, everything from gun control to immigration, and abortion was also considered. But without focusing on one salient issue, I think it's difficult to draw specific conclusions on exactly what causes justices to behave in a certain way. And the study also evaluated incentives for justices to respond to public opinion over time, from fear of appearing political to maintaining institutional legitimacy. And the study also explored whether the current court is actually unusually political, as some might claim, or if it's simply maintaining continuity. So we found that actually the court over time has generally been unresponsive to public opinion on abortion. However, the current court does appear to be the most unaligned and least concerned with public opinion, preliminarily speaking, based on some brief analysis. So this could be an area for future study, is looking at court extremity over time, how that changes, and specifically also looking at the influence of factors like Catholicism or even organizations like the Federalist Society. With the recent case Dobbs v. Jackson, 5 of the conservative justices who voted to overturn Roe were both Catholic and affiliated with the Federalist Society. So considering the role of that over time, these are kind of preliminary influences, but more robust conclusions can be drawn if we give it perhaps some years to look at more Supreme Court cases that come out of the current conservative court. And that's all for my presentation. Thank you so much for attending my pre-recorded presentation for Undergraduate Research Week. Have a great rest of your week.